Hi everyone, I hope you're well. It's a pity we can't be all face to face and that I can't deliver this live. Fortunately, I'm actually in the field out on Gunai Kurno country in Sale at the moment. About to head off and check out a few sites for a new project, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment. So I'll give you a bit of an update on the work that we've been doing. And these are the people who have sort of helped me along the way and well, in many cases done the work. So, as an update for Darwin Crater, hopefully you can see that with my little image in the top right. We've extended the record back deeper into glacial stage 6 and work's continuing through this. Nothing to really report at the moment, as I haven't really interrogated the data, just to show you that we're moving in this space, except for this little interesting interval here at the termination of glacial isotope stage number 6 into interglacial stage number 5. This is the last transition from an ice age to interglacial in Tasmania without humans in the landscape, without the Pala Aboriginal Tasmanians in the landscape. There's a really interesting sort of pattern that we're finding recurring in a few places, and I'll show you a bit of data we've recently published on this, where there's a nice correlation, as you might expect, between eucalypts and charcoal. And actually this kind of U-shaped curve here of charcoal through a glacial transition from an ice age to from a glacial period to an interglacial period is really characteristic of all the glacial transitions that we've observed so far. And it's something that we're working on, and particularly in a paper that we're just about to submit for the Antarctic cold reversal. It's a clear signature. And it's something to do with the way that the westerlies respond to these really significant shifts in global boundaries, these sort of Earth system dynamics. So as I referred to it a moment ago, we've recently put out some work on the relationship between eucalypts and fire through time. This is work that came out of Haiti Cad's thesis. We compared the long-term records from Lake Osborne and Lake Perry to really close sites, 230 metres apart, virtually identical. Yet at one site, rainforest persisted despite the fact that it was burnt really frequently. At another site, the rainforest collapsed after about 3,000 years ago. We interrogated some differences why. Topography might have come into play, but this particular paper was testing the role of flammable species, eucalypt invasions. And it turns out that every post-fire shift in rainforest at the site that eventually collapsed saw an increase in eucalypts, whereas the site that didn't collapse, there was no increase in eucalypts. And this is reflected in this superposed epoch analysis. You can see here at 0 lag years at the time of the fire and within 65 years of the fire, or 60 years of the fire, you saw an increase in eucalypts at the site that collapsed, rainforest collapsed and turned into a eucalypt forest, where that didn't occur no matter how many times it was burnt at the other site. And this enabled us to kind of revise some ecological theory around the role of flammable species invasions when you get switches between alternative stable states, which you can have a read of yourself. And a paper that's just been accepted in quaternary science reviews on a similar kind of topic, Lake Vera, 18,000 year high resolution record of this site, which seems to be starting to shift from rainforest into a eucalypt forest. We're kind of testing the various factors that are causing this shift. This is a beautiful pollen diagram that we worked up for this. Fairly Hopf did the work for this. And you can see some really significant shifts through time. The main thing here is towards the end, in the last 3,000 years, you start to see some of these disturbance taxa move in following some fires. So we did some time series testing on this. This time it was Granger causality. And it turns out that eucalypts, okay, there was eucalypts in the termination of the last ice age, and there was charcoal, and there was a lot of eucalypts and charcoal in the late Holocene. And it turns out that in the late Pleistocene, charcoal leads eucalypts, so it seems as though the eucalypt presence is due to burning. Whereas in the Holocene, and particularly in the late Holocene, it seems as though eucalypts lead charcoal. Okay, so that hypothesis is confirmed. So it's showing there that the arrival of eucalypts is actually changing the fire regime. So we're starting to pin down the really pivotal role of eucalypts in ecosystem dynamics in Australia from these long-term records. So it's pretty exciting. Some further work on fire in Tasmania. This is a grassland landscape surrounded by rainforest. And you can see here it's a vale. We can't really see that it's a vale, but it's a vale. On one side, the bottom side here, it's a side facing the northwest. And on the other side, you have slopes facing southeast. And the vale is treeless with rainforest pockets on the side. And you can see the green there is the rainforest. So we analysed some of these boundary dynamics between the grasslands and the rainforest to see why this vale, why this system was treeless, and what some of the factors were that govern the response of the rainforest system to fire in this landscape. So here's a site, a pollen record from the northwest facing side of the vale. You can see here deeper to shallower. This is not dated except for relatively dated using invasive species pollen. You can see here there's a charcoal peak, and it shifts, so it eventually switches from a eucalypt forest into a grassland, okay, upon this fire, which we assume is around the 1850s and 1890s, because that's when the first cattle arrived in the region. If we go to the other side of the vale, the southeast facing side, you can see that similar fire peak right around the time when invasive species arrive, but there's absolutely no shift in the rainforest pollen. And these are located very similarly right on the edge of the rainforest grassland boundary, these two sites. So they're responding very, very differently, very differently. We also caught some trees on either side, and the top two are from the northwest facing forest. And you see the top one there, we found a burnt tree within that forest, a burnt nothofagus tree. And around that tree, the established cohort within a 50-metre radius of that tree, all dated to after the arrival of the first graziers in the region, okay, the first cattlemen and things in the region. On the other side here, the other forest here, you can see the vast majority of trees established following the arrival of graziers in the region. Whereas on the southeast facing slopes, you see trees stretching back to the 1600s, well before the British even invaded, right, and there's continual recruitment right through. So this shows essentially that there's a different kind of dynamic happening on the southeast facing slope and the northwest facing slope. So for a year, we set out some temperature and humidity loggers. And it turns out, whilst subtle, there's not much temperature difference across either side of the vale, but there's a significant, okay, and this is through a t-test here with the p-values. You can see that it is significantly drier on the northwest facing side relative to the southeast facing side. And what we see has happened is when the British arrived with their stockmen, the government was urging everyone to burn, as the Aboriginal people did, recognising that they could potentially improve pasture. They attempted to burn the rainforest out of this vale. They couldn't move the forest on the southeast facing slope because it was too wet. And they could move. They burnt effectively, almost incinerated the entire forest on the northwest facing slope because it was drier. So we're starting to pick up some landscape scale response and influences over how fire burns rainforest in this landscape. So getting really quite granular here. And if we compare that to people, we have a northwest facing site here and a southeast facing site here. Okay, the top one's northwest, the bottom one's southeast. You can see here that fire within the forest, this is inside forest, really corresponds tightly with grass, okay? So this is on a drier slope. You burn, you get grass. You don't burn, forest comes in, okay? Really tight correlation. On the southeast facing slope, the really wet rainforest side, you can actually get fire in there, and there was fire in there between around about 1,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago. And what happens when you get fire in there, the rainforest turns into eucalypt forest, okay? So reflecting the different microclimate. Turns out at both sites, the highest fire occurs right in combination with the most population growth inferred from human population growth inferred from the archaeological data. So it looks like as populations are surging in this landscape, and we found this in other parts of the northwest, more fire is being introduced in the landscape, and people are shifting the forest boundaries and altering forest systems through fire as there is more Aboriginal people in landscapes. So a really nice link there between people. And then finally, I know I'm running over time. I know I'm running over time and my phone's talking to me. We've just got this new ARC Discovery Indigenous, Simon Connor, Michaela Mariani and Yoshime Izumi from the ANU, Nottingham and Amsterdam respectively, looking at how fire has changed over the last 500 years and essentially testing the notion that fires under Aboriginal management were cooler burning than under British management. And the removal of cultural burning is contributing to the, if not completely responsible for catastrophic bushfires prior to climate change, and has been accelerated since climate change. And we're asking a series of questions. Have fuel loads increased? Has the composition of fuels changed? Are there more flammable, less flammable species now? Have fires become more frequent? Have they become hotter? So we're looking at pollen calibrations with vegetation, FTIR to get at temperature of fire on a series of records spanning the last 500 years, recognising that if you compare massacre data in Southeast Australia of Aboriginal people, it virtually discretely overlays where the catastrophic bushfires have occurred a few decades following the end of these last massacres. And if you compare that to fuel accumulation in these forests, you can see there's almost a linear rate of fuel accumulation following time since last fire in these forests. So it's logical to think that the removal of cultural burning, accumulation of fuels, a few decades after the removal of cultural burning, so much fuel in the landscape, you start to see bushfires. And we're testing this notion with a series of records right across the southeast of Australia. And that's what I'm here for now, looking at these sites, focusing in on some that we hope will have longer records, that we can really start to tease these things out, and working with the Gunai on sites that they co-manage, okay, so joint managed sites such as Sperm Whalehead and others, to see what we can contribute to their management and what they desire to know from our work. Thanks a lot for your time.